We're studying through the 12 apostles in this class, and we are taking a look today at Judas. And so to start off, just kind of have an icebreaker type question here. Have you ever been betrayed? Anybody ever been betrayed? Yeah, okay. Only 5-6 of you, so that's good. I'm going to guess there's more people that feel betrayed than that. How do you feel and act towards the person who betrayed you when you went through that? How do you typically handle that when that first happens? Susan?
I think usually, in my experience anyway, if someone has betrayed me, truly hurt me, and meant to, they're pretty much not going to be around me anymore without me having to do anything. You can pray for your acceptance of the situation and pray for them, but that's, as far as one-on-one with them, you just really don't seem to have that anymore unless something like that happens.
Okay, you don't trust them one-on-one. You want to separate yourself from them because they're toxic and you don't want that around you anymore. How else do we handle that sometimes?
Disappointment.
You're just disappointed. And you're angry. And when we're angry, sometimes we want to say things, or we do say things that maybe we regret later, and maybe we want to do things to try to avenge ourselves of the person who's betrayed us and who's hurt us deeply. And so as we think about that, I think that's our natural, our gut reaction. I want you to think about that and let that be the backdrop in your mind as we think about Jesus, who's dealing with someone who betrayed him and who he knew was going to betray him. And think about how Jesus dealt with and handled that situation. So let's think about Judas Iscariot, the betrayer. Interestingly, if you take a look at the 3 lists of the apostles, and we've taken a look at these in most of our classes. Matthew 10 is one of the lists. Mark's list is in Mark 3. Luke's list is in Luke 6. And then Luke has another list in Acts chapter 1. But in these 3 passages, how is Judas described? We don't just get his name. When we have the other apostles, we get their name. Maybe a couple, there's a brief description like Simon the Zealot. But here, take a look at the different versions. Matthew 10 and verse 4 says, Simon the Zealot, and then Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. It's like Matthew's making the point. This is what he's known for. This is what he's famous for. He's the one who betrayed Jesus. Jesus put him into the apostleship, and yet Judas betrayed him. Mark 3:19, Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him, Mark says. And then Luke 6, verse 16, Judas, the son of James, and we have Judas Iscariot, who became a traitor. I don't think Matthew, Mark, and Luke have a very positive feeling about Judas when they write these things. They're making it very clear that this is one of the identifying marks of Judas. This is going to be his reputation. This is how he's going to be known. And when you hear the name Judas, it is just, it connotes someone who's a traitor or a betrayer. John MacArthur writes this in 12 Ordinary Men. He says, the New Testament tells us plenty about Judas, enough to accomplish 2 things. First, the life of Judas reminds us that it is possible to be near Christ and associate with him closely, but superficially, and yet become utterly hardened in sin. And second, Judas reminds us that no matter how sinful a person may be, no matter what treachery he or she may attempt against God, the purpose of God cannot be thwarted. God knew that there was going to be a betrayer. This is a subject of prophecy that you find in Zechariah, as we're going to note here in a couple of minutes. And the purpose of God was not thwarted. Indeed, Judas became the betrayer. Now, let's think about this before we get into the betrayal, because the scriptures give us a few more details about Judas in a couple different passages. So in John chapter 12, what was the role of Judas Iscariot among the apostles? He plays a special role among the apostles. And what is that role according to John 12 and John?
Money bag.
Carried the money bag, okay? He is the apostolic treasurer, okay? He's the treasurer of the apostles, carries the money bag, the text says. And what did he do with the money bag? Stole from it. He pilfered from it. There was money that was supposed to be used for the apostles and their work, and there were times that Judas was skimming from it. Words that we would use: embezzling, pilfering, lifting. He's stealing. So he is a thief before he ever betrayed Jesus. So we know that this was a temptation for him before we ever get to the money that's involved in the betrayal of Jesus. But he abused his stewardship. And so think about that. Take a look at what Barclay writes first. He says, the fourth gospel has its own story of how Mary of Bethany anointed Jesus with a very precious ointment. That was a lovely deed, but the reaction of Judas was that it was a shocking waste, for the ointment could have been sold for 300 denarii, and the proceeds given to the poor. John's comment is that Judas said this not because he cared for the poor, but because he had the bag. And as the KJV has it, he bare what was put therein. He goes on to write, the Greek word which is translated to bear is bastasian. Don't know if I pronounced that right, but hopefully you get it. Certainly bastasian means to bear or to carry, but it also means to pilfer in colloquial Greek. It's like the Scottish use of the verb to lift. To lift a thing can be to carry it, but it may be to steal it, as in the word a shoplifter. Okay? Shoplifter means you went to a shop and you lifted things and put it in your pockets you didn't pay for. And that's what the word means when applied to Judas. What John is saying is that Judas was a covetous man who used his position as the treasurer of the apostolic band to pilfer from the common purse. All right? So I think I want to use this moment to think just for one question a little bit about money, right? Because churches need money to do the Lord's work just like Jesus and his apostles did. When you read Luke 8, there were some women who were contributing to that money bag so that Jesus and his apostles could do the work that they were doing. And some of those women are noted in Luke chapter 8. When you read Philippians 3, it talks about Paul receiving the fellowship from the church at Philippi. And that word fellowship is from the Greek word koinonia, where we get our word coin. And so part of fellowship in Philippians 3 was the giving of money, so that the church at Philippi could become a partner in Paul's work as they help support him. And so money is involved in the work of the Lord. A collection on the first day of the week was a practice of the early church. So 1 Corinthians 16 says on the first day of the week, collection was taken for the saints so they could do the work. So this money, right, you have a collection being taken. It has to be collected, it has to be counted, and then it has to be distributed to whoever the church has chosen to support in the doing of this work. So if you're going to be collecting sums of money from members, and there has to be people who count the money and distribute the money, then what do you think some common sense practices might be so we can avoid a Judas situation? Two counters. Notice Judas has the money bag individually. And so a good common sense practice in a lot of churches would be that there's two people who are co-signers, two people who are involved in counting the money, who are witnesses to one another. I would also suggest that they be unrelated people, because sometimes related people will cover for each other. But two people, more than one. You see that in a couple of places in Scripture. For example, when Paul was taking up a collection so that it could be sent to the needy widows in Jerusalem, for example, he often would send multiple people to carry this money to wherever it was going to go. Never was it given to just one person. There's some good common sense and actually some biblical evidence that that's a good practice. What else? What else would you suggest?
Audit.
An audit. From time to time, we need to do an audit. Yeah. Okay. So how do we do that? Yeah.
You find out how the money is dispersed.
Mm-hmm.
Who is it dispersed to? What did you begin with?
Mm-hmm. You find out how it was dispersed, who it was dispersed to. Where? Okay, good.
But part of that is just transparency of like monthly statements that we show, like where the money's coming from, where it's going, what it's for.
Mm-hmm.
Just make it open to everybody to see.
Yeah. Transparency. Yeah, here's the books. You want to know what it was spent on and how much was collected on this Sunday and this month, and being transparent. That's a good practice as well, because everybody's involved in, the giving, and we're all part of the church, and so transparency is helpful.
Josh, not only is that a good practice for the church, but it's good for us as individuals because it helps protect us from sin, temptation. So it's,
Sure.
it does a couple of things.
And this is a kindness. We're looking out for one another. Here's a question I would have. If you know that somebody has had money issues, like an addiction that requires money, or a bankruptcy that would certainly be helped out with money, do you think it'd be wise to have those people counting the money in that particular situation? The reason why I say this is important, and I bet Ed has probably dealt with this at some point in your years of preaching, but first work I ever had, we had a big issue a couple of years after I was there, where we had a guy come down from another congregation who was the preacher, and he gotten fired. And he got fired because he had a drug problem, and not just a drug problem, but they didn't have elders, they didn't have deacons, and they put him in charge of counting the money. You got a guy with a drug problem who's counting the money, and he's the preacher, and he was writing checks to himself, just signing them himself and cashing them himself. And so then he comes down to where we are, and that's a big deal because you guys can't accept him as a member, right? Because he needs to fix, he needs to fix this. But there could have been some wisdom before he ever was given this role that would have prevented this perhaps from happening. And sometimes we need to think through some of these things, these practices. So, Tim.
The two people who are counting money and making the bank deposits are not the ones who are receiving the bank statements, so that those two can be compared independently.
Yeah, that's a good idea, a good practice as well. So there's some things that I think our elders, former elders, deacons, treasurers, they've thought through, I know, in a lot of these areas, but I think it's important for all of us to kind of think through some of these good common sense practices, because we don't want to have a Judas situation. We want to learn from the Judas situation and others like it.
The congregation that I was at when I obeyed the gospel, the treasurer, there was no term limits on the treasurer, so he had it forever and became the sole person to do everything, and got into a similar situation where he was taking advantage of the money box. So, term limits for everybody's benefit. You don't have the same person being the lifetime treasurer of the congregation.
Yeah, that's an interesting one there too. So, but a few things that I just threw up here on this. We've already mentioned 2+ individuals count the offering. So, I don't like to personally touch money, so I would just say preacher not included, elders maybe even not included. Give it and trust it to somebody else, a deacon situation, and then no individuals with addiction or bankruptcy history who are currently unemployed, because you have more of a money temptation when you're facing money problems or you've had an addiction problem. Immediate deposit. I've known churches where members are saying, I gave this check to the church like 6 weeks ago, but it never got cashed. And so this big bag of money is sitting in somebody's house somewhere, or in a church building somewhere, and it never got deposited that week. And so deposit it quickly so that we can avoid any theft from other people. These are just, I think, some good common sense practices that we don't always have the chance to talk about it or think through it, but some things to maybe think through so that we can have wisdom in how we handle this type of situation. TJ, did you have a hand up?
No, I was just scratching you.
Okay, you be careful about scratching. You get called on. All right. Now, let's move on. After the comments of Judas noted in John 12, what does he do according to other gospel accounts to gain some money? What do you read in Matthew 26, Mark 14, Luke 22? What does Judas do?
Wants to sell Jesus out.
Okay, wants to sell Jesus out. I'll betray Jesus. How much will you give me? How much should he get? 30 pieces of silver. According to Exodus chapter 21 and verse 32, that was the same amount of money that would be given to, I believe it was a gored slave. 30 pieces of silver. That's how much Jesus was worth to him. What's his motive? Greed. 1 Timothy 6 warns about the danger of greed. 1 Timothy 6, 9 and 10. Let's take a look at verse 9. It says, "Those who desire to be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and into many foolish and harmful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. The love of money is a root of all kinds of evil, for which some have strayed from the faith in their greediness and pierced themselves through with many sorrows." And Judas would certainly fit into that category. The love of money drowned him in destruction and perdition as he gave into the temptation, ruined his reputation, and he lost his soul. Now, before we cast stones at Judas, how can money be a root of evil and temptation in our own lives? Charles.
That's got a question. I don't know the answer to this.
Mm-hmm.
I was just sitting here thinking, I agree with everything you said as far as us judging somebody like that. I can see that. But I'm sitting here wondering, if we consider these people Christians and have been converted, how do we draw the line from that?
I think we need to kind of understand how people are tempted and be honest with one another if we are tempted in a certain way.
I understand the mindset. Don't misunderstand. I'm not questioning anything that's been said, but it run across me whenever we recognize people that's been come forward and baptized and get a little experience behind them and so forth. How do we make judgments? And this all makes common sense to me as far as from a human standpoint. I'm just wondering, how do we separate that from a person that's been converted?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'd say all of us in the church have been converted, but that doesn't mean because you've been converted that you don't struggle with certain temptations and difficulties. And so out of love and concern for one another, I think we need to be careful when we know someone struggles with a certain temptation or issue that we not put them in a situation where it would be easier to give in to that temptation or that issue. I mean, if you've done something inappropriate with let's take a sex offender, something like that, you can convert and you can be forgiven of that sin, but in my estimation, you are never going to teach a child's class. Never. We're not going to put you in that position because we understand that you're tempted in that way. At least that's where I'm coming from on that. You guys can stir things up with me a little bit, but that's where I'm coming from on that. I will tell you, insurance companies, that's where they come from on that. If they know that you've got a sex offender who is teaching classes, then they will cancel you because they don't think it's wise that you're doing that. So there's things, and I think that's out of concern for other people. I care about you. I don't want to put you in this position because I know that this has been a struggle for you, and that's something I think to consider. Kim?
And also, if that person is truly a repentant person and ask for that forgiveness, they would understand that completely.
Yeah, I think that's a good point too. I understand you're looking out for me, and I appreciate that. Yeah, TJ.
There's just like some sins that we commit that we can get forgiveness for if we truly repent. But some of those sins, like you were just talking about, a child molester, they make consequences will take with us to the grave.
Mm-hmm.
When some of those sins, even though we get forgiveness.
Mm-hmm. Take it out of that sphere. You know, you've had a alcohol problem in the past, and you've struggled with that. I'm not going to take you to the ball game where there's beer all over the place. I think that'd be me putting you in a situation where that'd be a stumbling block for you, could weaken you. I don't want to put you in that situation because I care about you, and I understand that you're tempted that way, and so I want to be sensitive to that. And so I think, to me, this is the same type of situation. We need to be concerned with that. Now, I want to take a look at this quote from Brian Nash. He says, when asked in 1991 what would you do for $10 million? Here's how America responded. 25% of Americans would abandon their entire family for $10 million. 1 out of 4 people. 25% would abandon their church if they could get $10 million. 23% will become prostitutes for a week or more if they could get $10 million. 16% would give up their American citizenship. 16% would leave their spouses for $10 million. Price is right. They would leave their spouse. 10% will withhold testimony to let a murderer go free. 7% would kill a stranger. 7% of people said they would kill a stranger for $10 million. And 3% said they'd put their children up for adoption. So Judas, he says, what would you do for a measly 30 shekels of silver? His answer, betray the Lord. It's amazing what some people will do for money. And it's amazing what Judas did to an innocent person for money. Now, why do you think Judas and the enemies of Jesus did their work at night rather than in broad daylight? You notice that's mentioned a couple times in John 13, verse 30, John 18, 2 and 3, that this happened at night. Why do you think they did it at night?
Cowards.
Cowards. Yeah, you're hiding it. You don't want to do it in the broad daylight.
In Scripture, there's an association of darkness and evil, all the way back to the Old Testament as well as in the New Testament. And that I think that the idea of being undetected in the dark gives you freedom to do things that you ought not to do.
Anybody's parents ever tell you there's nothing good that happens after filling your curfew? 11 o'clock. What was it?
10:30.
10:30.
No, I got to be a junior.
Nothing good happens after 10:30, so you need to be home. Well, there's sometimes some truth to that, isn't there?
11:30.
Okay. What insulting sign does Judas give to seal his betrayal work? Kiss. The kiss of Judas in Mark chapter 14. Well, what did the prophet say about this? Let's look at Psalm 41 and verse 9. Psalm 41 and verse 9. What does the psalmist say there in verse 9? Anybody want to read that for us?
Even my close friend in whom I trusted, who ate my bread, has lifted up his heel against me.
Okay. My close friend in whom I trusted, who ate my bread, has lifted up his heel against me. That's prophecy looking ahead to Judas. Now, let's see. Was that Chris? Were you trying to read that? No, Andy. All right. Can you read Zechariah 11, 12, and 13? Handle that for us.
I said to them, if it is good in your sight, give me my wages, but if not, never mind. So they weighed out 30 shekels of silver as my wages. Then the Lord said to me, throw into the potter that magnificent price at which I was valued by them. So I took the 30 shekels of silver and threw them to the potter in the house of the Lord.
So excerpts of both of these prophecies are found in the Gospels connected to Judas, indicating to us that these are messianic prophecies that look ahead to events that were involved in the life of Jesus and with Judas here. So, did Jesus know that Judas was going to betray him? Yeah, he did. Yeah, in Matthew chapter 26, he reveals the person who's going to dip his bread in the sop. That's the one who's going to betray me. He knew who it was going to be. And that's mentioned in scriptures. Now, were these traits of Judas specifically, were they known when he was appointed, or were they discovered after he was selected? Do we know?
God knows all.
Didn't start out that way. What's that?
God knows all.
God knows all. Okay. Interesting. But how does Jesus treat Judas? So if he knows about these things, and if the prophecies indicated it was going to happen, and Jesus even points it out at the Feast of the Passover, who was going to betray him? How does Jesus treat Judas just prior to the betrayal? What's Jesus doing? Washing his feet. Now we go back to our icebreaker question. When you know somebody's betraying you, in the act of betraying you, How do you want to treat them? I'm mad. I don't want to wash your feet. I want to break your toes. Okay? I don't want to feed you, eat out. I don't want to eat bread with you in the sop. I want to poison your sop.
I wouldn't want to smell the socks or
All right. John chapter 13, look at verses 1 through 5. It says, before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come that he should depart from this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. And supper being ended, the devil having already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands and that he had come from God and was going to God, he rose from supper and laid aside his garments, took a towel and girded himself. And after that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel with which he was girded. Jesus still served his betrayer. What does Jesus call Judas when he arrives in the garden, when you look at Matthew 26 and verse 50? Friend. What do you want to call somebody who you know is about to come betray you?
Dirtbag.
Traitor, dirtbag. Okay. Yeah, there's probably other words that come to mind than friend, right? And Jesus calls him friend and serves him. He still treats him with love and dignity. What lessons can we learn from how Jesus treated somebody that he knew was an enemy? First of all, was he practicing what he preached? He was. Just Matthew chapter 5, verse 44, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said, love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. Do good to those who spitefully use you and persecute you. Jesus was doing exactly what he had called all of his disciples to do. So he was putting it into practice himself. Romans chapter 12 and verse 14, what does that say? Somebody's there?
Bless those who curse you.
Bless those who curse you. Romans chapter 12. And then we look at verses 20 and 21, which tells us how to deal with our enemies. Verse 20. Therefore, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. And if he is thirsty, give him a drink. In so doing, you will heap coals of fire on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. And that can be one of the most difficult aspects of living out the Christian ethic, and yet one of the most powerful. It's hard to hate somebody who's being good to you, even though you deserve to be treated with evil.
I
Clay.
think the most difficult part too is we've already kind of touched on it, that he was a friend, but he was acting like an enemy. And for Christians, I think a lot of times it's easy for us when people who are just only enemies, we can ignore them, or I don't really have a relationship with them, so it's easy for me to kind of treat them nice.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of times the people we mistreat the most are the ones who are closest to us. And when they get on our nerves, or we kind of have a judgment about them, we don't overcome, evil with good.
Mm-hmm.
And there ends up being more grudges there, like in the Judas situation. So I think that's a good lesson, is sometimes we mistreat the people who we actually have a relationship with more.
Mm-hmm. Good thoughts. Any other thoughts you guys have on this thing?
And I kind of did it out of spite. I'm telling myself here, but like, when somebody does something to you, betrays you, it almost throws them for a loop if you treat them kindly, like to the point of shocking. Like, and I've said I've done that before, almost like killing them with kindness, and not so much maybe in the right mind frame, but you can actually make more headway with that, and because what people know what they're doing to you, and they know the reaction, like, yeah, he's going to be upset. But when you don't give them that reaction, it throws the whole mindset off, and you can actually probably make more headway by that than trying to, you know.
Anybody have a success story like that where you did get betrayed, you did treat somebody respectfully, you didn't do it the wrong way, and they came back and apologized or said, "I'm sorry I treated you that way"? Anybody ever had that happen?
In our business, like, there's a lot of trust, like in.
Now, in your business, you talking about your teaching business or your coaching business?
Really,
You
the
ta-
coaching business.
Okay, all right.
There's a lot of trust
Mm-hmm.
with film exchange, with information that you may give a friend
Mm-hmm.
or that you worked with or coached with that knows how you do certain things that you entrust this information.
Mm-hmm.
It gets out, or you see something on, let's say on film or something, that how did they know what was going on?
Mhm.
If that person
Mhm.
didn't give them this information.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like when you go up and you shake hands after the game, you know,
Mhm.
great job, appreciate it, but we know where you got that information from. Don't worry, we're not gonna share ours, you know, something like that. And they,
Mhm.
you know, and then you usually get a text or a phone call later on, either in the night or the next day. Hey man, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You know, we'll make sure we do that correctly. You know, things
Yeah.
like that.
So you played against Bill Belichick then? I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Doesn't the attitude of the person that's being kind to somebody that hurt them make a difference too? I mean, you can't be doing it to get back.
Sure. I think so. I think there's a sincerity about what Jesus is doing. Jesus is trying to prick the heart and not trying to do it out of spite. Like, I'm going to be fake nice to you. Yeah, it's a good point. So, Brian Nash writes this. How did Jesus treat Judas? Was he contemptuous, rude, hateful? No, Jesus treated Judas with the same love and respect as he did the other 11. In Matthew 26:50, Jesus responded to Judas' betrayal by calling him friend. Have you ever felt betrayed? Perhaps someone's lied to you or cheated you. I'm sure you can think of a lot of words to call them before friend would ever come to your mind, but here Christ calls Judas friend. Jesus teaches us a wonderful lesson, and yet we often respond so differently. When we feel betrayed, we like to get up on our high horse instead of getting down on our knees. Christ truly practiced what he preached. Now, after Judas betrays Jesus, what emotions does Judas feel? What extreme actions does he take? He feels remorse. And because he feels remorse, he goes and he kills himself, hangs himself. What?
Gives the money back.
He gives the money back too. They don't want the money, so they go buy the potter's field, which was also a fulfillment of prophecy when they did that. But what did Jesus say about Judas in Mark 14:21? Be better if he wasn't born. Because
Josh, something I'm not sure, I believe this is, I believe Judas, when he betrayed Jesus, I don't think he was betraying Jesus to get captured and put in jail and then, or killed. I think he thought Jesus was going to get out of it just like he has every other thing. So I think that maybe puts a different perspective and helps us see why he was so distraught, because what he thought was going to happen was not. He thought he was getting 30 pieces of silver.
Yeah.
For really no, I mean, he was going to see a show. Jesus was going to, turn him away or do something. And
Yeah.
he's got 30 pieces of silver.
I think that's a good point. He thought, Jesus has got out of pickles before, and he'll get out of it again. I'll get a little bit of money out of it. But that doesn't work out the way that he thought it was going to work out, and then he looks like a dirtbag, as Russell mentioned earlier, and he knows it. It's going to ruin his reputation among anybody that he respected. Susan.
Jesus is in a unique position, of course, because he's the Son of God and he knows everything. So maybe he knew someone had to betray him. He had to feel some kind of love for Judas. And he knows you feel sorry that he's lost. I mean, Jesus feels a whole lot different toward Judas than we would against another human being, because Judas is God's child too.
Sure. Supreme remorse, because he realizes who he's betrayed. Good. I'm going to skip over this little quote right here, but let's move on to the next question so we can finish this. But for every problem, there's a Bible passage to help us. Suicide is one of those Bible topics. What can we learn from Judas about how extreme guilt can affect us?
Clouds are judgment.
Clouds are judgment. I have 1 Samuel 31 referenced here. Who were we talking about in 1 Samuel 31? Saul. Yeah, Saul gets wounded, and Saul decides he falls on his own sword and kills himself because he'd rather kill himself than get killed by a Philistine. That'd be embarrassing to him.
But that passage doesn't help me know what to do.
In terms of if you are feeling the extreme guilt, or if you know someone else who's going through that.
Either passage.
Okay.
I mean, either situation. I don't think that passage. It just shows me that somebody else did it and how they handled it. But if you didn't kill yourself, I don't think that was the right thing to do.
Oh, I don't think it was the right thing to do. I think the right thing to do would be for Judas to have owned up to what he had done, and you got to take your lumps sometimes when you do things that are sinful and that are wrong. But he refused to do that. He'd rather kill himself.
I can understand what you would get from that passage that would help me know how to handle a situation.
I see what you're saying. I guess I'd say look for the warning signs in people when you know that they've done something embarrassing or humiliating and gone through something extremely difficult. We need to look for those warning signs, and we need to let people know that we're there for them to try to help them fix it, walk through it, and hopefully correct it. People need to know. And this is far too common a happening than it needs to be.
In other places, the Bible tells us we should kill. Which, whether it's to self or somebody else, it's still killing. Even though he might have been on the way being killed. He was pretty much there, but still. He did it not to be embarrassed, I think.
To know you had to ask God for forgiveness, and to know you had just betrayed and had God's son killed might feel like it's not going to happen. You couldn't obtain forgiveness. You know, it is he was at a desperate, point of life. Now, he should not have taken that, but that was a big burden for him to know.
And yet Peter denied Jesus and was forgiven and was used. And Judas betrayed Jesus and chose not to face the difficulty of truly repenting and coming back to him. Well, we're out of time. These are some things we didn't really have much time for, maybe just a few points, but I'll let you read those as we close. Some final lessons from Judas. Thank you for your participation today. And again, there's lesson books for the last couple lessons in the back if you need